So what kind of properties do you want to buy? Well, there's a lot of things you want to look for when buying a property for a buy and hold strategy. You're buying a rental property, you're going to be married to that property. You're going to own it for probably several years, and you really want to make the right choice about which property you buy. Some things to look for in an area that you're going to invest in, like a city, would be affordability. And we're going to explain how appreciation works in real estate in a little while. And we're going to explain what factors cause certain properties to appreciate more than other properties. And one factor that limits the amount of appreciation you can get on a property is affordability. So you really want to look for, above average per capita incomes areas and below average median home prices. So in other words, whenever you have people that make more than average income and have to spend less than average on a house, that's a good thing. You want to look for low unemployment. Stronger economies and cities with stronger economies and lower unemployment rates tend to have stronger appreciation. Look for high migration. Migration is key. What's the ratio of people moving into an area versus people moving out of an area? If more people are moving in than moving out, nothing will predict future values of properties more than that factor. And look at prices and bubbles. In other words, are you in a market that has a real estate bubble that has not corrected yet, or are you, in a cycle where it has corrected and it's poised to go up more? So what are the specific types of properties that we actually buy? Well, we've developed a proprietary method of determining the investment grade for single family houses, and I'm going to try to explain some of that in this presentation today. In general, the considerations are these. You want classic 3-bedroom, 2-bath, urban, middle America bread and butter homes. You don't want funky homes. You want your classic 3-2s. And you want these homes in targeted inner city neighborhoods, and we're going to elaborate on that a lot bit more. I mean, not bad neighborhoods, not the best neighborhoods, just average affordable home neighborhoods that first-time home buyers, for example, would be able to buy into. You want to buy below the metropolitan median price. In other words, if the average price in an area is $200,000, you really want to buy $150,000. As a quick and general rule, we like 1,000 to 1,200 square foot houses that you can pick up for $150,000 plus or minus. But we want to get those houses in areas that are adjacent to much more expensive homes, like $300,000 homes. These tend to be the easiest to rent and easiest to sell properties in the whole city. Some of the advanced considerations are location, schools, amenities. You want to be in good locations. You don't want a lot of competing rentals in the area. It's really funny. Sometimes I've asked either realtors or property managers, where's a good place to buy rental property? And I've heard them actually say, well, this area, this neighborhood's a good rental area. That's a good rental area. Well, why is that? Well, there's a lot of rental properties in there. A lot of rental properties in there. I don't want to be in an area with a lot of rental properties. I want to be the only rental property in a neighborhood, because if you're in an area with lots of rental properties, you think that area is going to appreciate? Probably not. Other considerations are build quality. You do want houses that are going to last because you're going to own them a long time. Maintenance projection. There's certain types of properties you might not want because of all the maintenance required. You probably don't want a house with a pool. You probably don't want a house with a well. You may not want a house with a septic system, that sort of thing. You do want to look at cash flow, and we're going to talk a lot about cash flow. I will argue that cash flow is not at all your most important criteria, but it is something to consider. You want to look at what kind of discount you can get when you buy the property, many other factors. So we're going to go through this as we go through the presentation. The thing to remember is this. You want to optimize your growth in value for maximum return on capital. In other words, you want to get maximum appreciation within acceptable cash flows. So where do you find these properties, and what exactly do you want to buy? Well, this is a highly simplified chart that tries to explain what you want in general. In general, if you take a look at the core of any city, besides just the downtown area, you're going to have neighborhoods adjacent to the downtown area that have very expensive homes on very expensive land. And in general, these are not the best places to invest, simply because the properties are probably too expensive. And we don't want real expensive properties. When a property doubles in value, the rent doesn't double. The rent only goes up maybe 30% when the price of the house goes up maybe 70%. So better cash flow is with cheaper properties. So we can't afford to buy a rental property for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. The cash flow just is too terrible. But just adjacent to those kind of inner city neighborhoods are other neighborhoods that are not quite as nice, but a lot less expensive. And those are the neighborhoods you really want. Now, you do have to watch out. You don't want the high crime areas. You don't want the areas that are poor neighborhoods, but you want the neighborhoods that are affordable, that you can envision are going to become part of those more expensive neighborhoods as that city grows and evolves over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. Of course, beyond the inner city, you start getting out into the suburbs. And the problem with the suburbs is, in general, when you're buying in the suburbs, you've got relatively inexpensive land with relatively expensive houses on them. And the truth is that it's the land that you're investing in. It's the land that really appreciates in value. The houses don't appreciate much in value because a house is never going to be worth much more than whatever it costs to build that house. If you're buying houses out in the suburbs, the house is never going to be worth any more than whatever a builder could build that house for. And because there's so much land out there, the builders are always going to be able to build more houses. So the properties, as you get further and further out, and as you get into areas with more and more land available for building, those properties just never appreciate any faster than the cost of construction. And that's not much appreciation. So you really want to be, again, in those kind of affordable inner city areas where you're not competing with the builders. There is no more land available for new construction. So what's going to drive appreciation is competition to be close to downtown at an affordable level. So what do you not want to buy? Well, in any city, you're going to see some similar examples of what you'd want to buy and what you don't want to buy. And for example, right in the middle of the city, just beyond the downtown office buildings, you get some really desirable high-end neighborhoods. Unfortunately, those neighborhoods are probably more expensive than you can afford. So you really can't afford to buy rental properties for $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 because you're just going to get, too poor cash flow. When a property doubles in value, the rent doesn't double in value, so the cash flow gets worse and worse as the price gets higher and higher. But just beyond those neighborhoods are kind of the adjacent neighborhoods where, it's the future of those neighborhoods. It's a little more affordable. It's where people who can't afford the really nice neighborhood go to be as close to downtown as possible, but still at an affordable level. They have very valuable land and much less expensive houses. Of course, there's always, as you go further out, areas that are poor areas or high crime areas. I would not invest in these areas. I think that's speculative investing. There's plenty of things you can do that I consider much less speculative than investing in a high crime area or a poor neighborhood that you hope will turn over, and maybe it will and maybe it won't, but you never know, because I've watched some poor neighborhoods stay poor for 20 years while others have turned over. I could have invested in some and would have been gambling. You also, again, in the further out suburbs, are going to have lots of competition from builders. Wherever there's land, you're going to have builders, and wherever there's builders, you're not going to find an opportunity to not compete with them. In other words, the value of your house, if it's in a subdivision where there's land nearby, will never be higher than whatever it costs to build that house over again. And then you're always going to also find neighborhoods that are just, very expensive or higher end neighborhoods. And those have already seen a lot of appreciation and probably will see more appreciation. However, again, because as properties double in value, rents don't double in value, you really can't afford to spend too much in a property if you want it to be a good investment grade property. So I think this picture really illustrates my point of why you just don't want to invest in rental property in the suburbs. A friend of mine owns an airplane. We were flying over a suburb, and this is what they look like from the air. And you can see very clearly, you've got this very nice neighborhood, and in a couple of years they're going to build out that middle area, and then in a couple more years they're going to build another subdivision adjacent to it, and then another subdivision adjacent to that, and then another subdivision adjacent to that. And those prices of those homes in that first subdivision, they just don't go up very much. A lot of times people buy into these subdivisions, by the way, because they want a big, nice new house out in the suburbs. So they buy these big, nice new houses out in the suburbs. They get a lot more house for their money than those inner city neighborhoods that I was talking about a minute ago. But the problem is then in 5 or 8 years they go to sell their home, and what are they doing? They're selling their home. But why do people move out into the suburbs? Because they want that nice, big, new home. And what do they have? What do you got at that point? You got a used home. So it's very difficult to sell 5 or 8 year old houses that were new 5 or 8 years ago and are adjacent to land that becomes new houses in 5 or 8 years from now. And that's why, as a just general rule, these make lousy investments, but as investors we do sometimes flip these things, or we do, frankly, a lot of short sales and foreclosures in these areas. Here's another slide that kind of illustrates the point. We call this a tale of two houses. On the left, we have a house, and it was bought in 2004. 4 bedroom, 2 bath, nice big house, 2,000 square feet out in the suburbs. Was purchased for $150,000 and rented for $1,100 a month. Now, pretty house. The investor that bought this thing thought that this thing was just the best rental property he ever saw. Hardy board construction, low maintenance. But what did he buy? He bought a expensive house on a cheap piece of land. What's the problem with that? Well, there's a lot of properties out there. The tenants tend to have high expectations. There's a lot of tenant turnover. And every time a tenant leaves that property, you've got to repaint it and recarpet it. Because it's 2,000 square feet, it's going to cost you like $8,000 in paint and carpet every time you get turnover, and you're going to get a lot more turnover. So the other thing to look at is what I said before. These properties just don't appreciate as much. So by 2009, 5 years later, this property is worth $165,000. So it is worth a little bit more, but really we'd call this a bad deal, because whatever money you made, you probably spent in turnover. Now on the right, is a property that we showed some investors, and some of the new investors kind of looked at this kind of rinky-dink old house and said, gosh, you know, wood construction's kind of old, dated, and the best looking house didn't look so good. Well, looks can be deceiving. This 1965 home was a 3-bedroom, 1 bath, and we actually like 2 baths. This only had 1. Only 1,000 square feet, but it's in an inner city neighborhood. This was bought for $150,000 and also rented for $1,100 a month. Now, why did this rent for $1,100 a month? Because in these inner city neighborhoods, people are close to downtown. They pay more for rent. What do we have here? We've got a cheap little house on a very expensive piece of land. And the other thing is, it's an old house. People don't expect an old house to be perfect. The old houses tend to be quaint. The people that live in these neighborhoods tend to don't leave very often, so you don't have as much turnover. But even when you do have turnover, it's only 1,000 square foot house. To paint and carpet a 1,000 square foot house might only cost $4,000. So you have to only have $4,000 of expense, and you don't have to pay that expense nearly as often. But the most important difference between this house and the other house is this. 2009, this house is worth $265,000. So think about that. You almost doubled your money. That's what we call a good deal.